Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. In case you're new here, my name is Laura and I'm a PhD student of Comparative Literature in Germany. And today I want to look at one important question of literary theory, that is, what is literature? Because we're always talking about literature and literary devices and the literary and literary texts other than non-literary texts, but very few scholars really take the time to reflect deeply on the question, what is literature really and can we even define it? So that's what I want to tackle today. I want to start with a short disclaimer. The term literature is very diverse and used in many different contexts over time, so it is very difficult, if not even impossible, to pin it down to one single valid definition that everyone will be satisfied with and that will serve all different purposes and contexts. So I think this is just not possible. So please don't consider the ideas that I present today as the universal truth of what literature is or anything the like. I just want to present you three different ideas from different angles, from different scholars. One of them is Terry Eagleton, who has been writing an introductory chapter about what is literature in his work Literary Theory and Introduction, which has been widely acclaimed as one of the most important books on literary theory, and he has a very interesting approach. Then I want to look at the account of Peter Lamarque and Stein, Haugom, Olsen, two scholars that I am also working with within my PhD thesis, and one of them is a philosopher, Peter Lamarque, and the other one is a literary scholar, Stein, Haugom, Olsen, and they have been developing their idea of what a literary work can be and how texts can be identified as literary works within their work Truth, Fiction and Literature. And then I also want to look at the idea of Robert Stecker, who has also been writing an essay called What is Literature? So as you can see, these are just three examples of the wide range of scholars who have been dealing with that question. But I had to start somewhere, and these were some of the accounts that I found to be most interesting to discuss in this video today. So first I want to start with Terry Eagleton. He is a literary theorist. He is also a Marxist, so he's close to the ideas of Marxism, but I will not delve deeper into that because I don't think it's too important for this approach that I want to talk to you today about, because his work on literary theory just looks at the history of the contemporary treatment of texts from the Romantics of the 1900s onwards to nowadays, to contemporary scholars, or at least to the postmodernist scholars from the 1980s. And his approach is basically that he says that many of the ideas that have been brought up to find distinctive features of literary works that non-literary works do not possess have been insufficient to describe the literary. So he discusses different approaches to the literary or to literature in general that have been brought up by different scholars. And the first idea he is starting with is the idea of literature as imaginative writing, or also fictional writing, because a lot of literary works are made up of fictional stories and things that are stories that are made up in the head of the writer, and things that don't even have a factual core. So the first account that Terry Eagleton presents is the idea of literature as imaginative writing, fictional stories with imagined plots, or writing that is not literally true. And although there are many stories that are fictional or imaginative, Terry Eagleton says that it does not suffice to describe the term, because there are so many different notions of works being described as literary works that are clearly not fictional, that are non-fictional works, such as autobiographies or also travel writings or letters even, even newspaper articles sometimes. So that does not suffice to describe the literary or literature in his account. Another very typical approach is to describe literature as texts or works that use language in peculiar ways. And peculiar can mean many different things, of course, but most of the ideas are connected with the idea of fine writing, making use of language in a very sophisticated way. And this has been a thought that was mainly executed in the 1800s in the ideas of the belles lettres, so the fine writing, where you can find ideas of writers making use of language in a very beautiful way by using lots of stylistic features and certain forms, certain literary forms, and trying to master these in a way. But that is also just a very narrow approach to what literary works can be. Terry Eagleton also mentions the Russian formalists, who have had their very own idea about literary works, but they were mainly concerned with poetry. So at first, formalists started out by seeing literary works as more or less arbitrary assemblages of devices, and only later came to see these devices as interrelated elements of functions within the text or within a total textual system. And devices could be things such as images, rhythm, syntax, meter, rhyme, and also narrative techniques. In fact, the whole stock of the formal literary elements, Eagleton writes. And all of these elements had one thing in common, and that was the estranging or defamiliarizing effect. So what the formalists said was that the specific to literary language was that it was deforming ordinary language in various ways by making use of it in ways that are not the ordinary or familiar or normal ways. But Terry Eagleton immediately criticizes that the question is what is the ordinary, even because ordinary can be very different for different groups of people, and the ordinary or everyday use of language is also very different. For example, if you think of people using dialect within their everyday speech and seeing this as the most normal or ordinary thing in the world because it's just what they are doing every single day, and then you go to another region and people talk completely differently and use different words or do use the same words but in different contexts. So this could also have a defamiliarizing or estranging effect, but it does not suffice to say that they are speaking in a literary way or writing in a literary way. So this does also not suffice to describe literature. Terry Eagleton also says that the Russian formalists realized this defect of their theory themselves, because they also realized that this did not really suffice to describe the literary, and that it also was dependent on the linguistic and cultural context. But still they would have referred to these inherent properties of literary works. So Terry Eagleton has this very nice example that I want to present to you. He says that you could imagine someone sitting at a pub and remarking the words, "This is awfully squiggly handwriting." And then you would ask yourself, is that literary or non-literary language? And as a matter of fact, it is literary language because it comes from the Norwegian writer Knut Hamsun's novel Hunger. But we only know that it is literary from the context, because we know that it is a literary work that has been acclaimed for being literary and also part of the canon of world literature and so on and so forth. But this is also just the context that tells us that it is literary, but the language itself has no inherent properties or qualities which might distinguish it from other kinds of discourse. So this also does not really suffice. And also what Terry Eagleton criticizes is the fact that formalists really do think of poetry when they think of literature, which is also different from prose writing in many, many ways. But most of you would probably agree that literature is much more than just poetry. So Eagleton goes much deeper into that, but I just wanted to give you an idea of what he's talking about. He also mentions other ideas, but basically he says that literature cannot just be described by having some inherent features, and this idea does not suffice to define the term. So what Eagleton really says is that it does not suffice to describe the literary as literature possessing some inherent features, because there is more to it. And there is also the idea that literature is a term referring to texts that are valued for certain things or qualities, and also that there are sets of values that people bring to these literary works to value them and to appreciate them in certain ways, which can be an intriguing kind of idea, because that's actually how literature has often been referred to, because it's also often referred to as an evaluative term to say this is literary but this is not, and stating that one of the works that you describe is of a higher quality in a certain regard than another. But then Eagleton also says that this does also not suffice, because there are so many different ideas of what this set of values can be, and you would also have to say goodbye to the idea that literature can be described objectively in any way, maybe unless you said that literature was everything that was ever written down, but then you don't have a term that can be narrowed down in any way or made distinctive, or also answer the question, how do we deal with the question that literary is different from non-literary. So he says basically anything can be literature as long as people regard it that way. I just want to read the final ones. I would just want to read some of the final sentences that Eagleton writes in his essay. He says, "If it will not do to see literature as an objective, descriptive category, neither will it do to say that literature is just what people whimsically choose to call literature. For there's nothing at all whimsical about such kinds of value judgment. They have their roots in deeper structures of belief which are as apparently unshakable as the Empire State Building. What we have uncovered so far, then, is not only that literature does not exist in the sense that insects do, and that value judgments by which it is constituted are historically variable, but that these value judgments themselves have a close relation to social ideologies. They refer in the end not simply to private taste, but to the assumptions by which certain social groups exercise and maintain power over others. If this seems a far-fetched assertion, a matter of private prejudice, we may test it out by an account of the rise of literature in England." So that is Terry Eagleton's account, and I don't want to go into detail on that. Also the idea of how certain social groups exercise and maintain power over others, because that can be interesting, but that's not what I want to focus on. I want to present different ideas today. And the second idea I want to present is the idea that is developed by Peter Lamarque and Stein, Haugom, Olsen in their book Truth, Fiction and Literature, A Philosophical Perspective, written in 1994. So they are describing literature as an institutional practice or a social practice in which everyone engages who is part of this reading, writing, interpreting and valuing community. So authors, writers, even the texts themselves are part of the community, and the readers of course make up a very big part, and they use a certain vocabulary to describe text and to talk about text and to write about text as well, same as the authors take part in certain conventions and try to meet certain expectations the readers might have. So there are story conventions, interpretive conventions, and evaluative conventions. The genre conventions tell authors how to write their books. When they want to write a book in a certain genre, they have to deal with certain expectations of the readers, and they have to write in a certain way to be understood in a certain way. This is just one aspect, but there's many more, of course. Then the interpretive convention tells readers how to interpret texts and which kinds of words to use to describe these texts and how to approach these texts, which are convenient approaches and which aren't, what is the right way in a way to deal with the text and what isn't. So this is also an important aspect. So this third aspect is about the evaluation of texts, which says why certain texts are valued over others and what is the kind of value that can be ascribed to a literary work and what makes up this aesthetic or whatever other kind of quality that a text has. So they define literature as something that is defined within that practice. So I will just read their most important definition from the text. They say, a text is identified as a literary work by recognizing the author's intentions that the text is produced and meant to be read within a framework of conventions defining the practice of literature. So they say that authors have certain intentions, the intention that their work is to be read in a certain way, and therefore they also try to write it in a certain way. And readers treat something as a literary work by assuming that the author had these intentions and then trying to read it this way so that they have an engaging perspective on the work and gain something from it and understand it the best way possible. And the basic idea behind that is that a reader adopts a so-called literary stance towards a work, which includes the expectation of a certain kind of value and also a value that is inherent in the text, but also a value that they gain from the reading experience. And as they expect this kind of value, it can be called literary value, aesthetic value. It can also be another kind of value like moral value, cognitive value, whatever you're interested in basically, but they are concerned with the aesthetic value, so the value that the work itself provides for you as a reader when reading, and also from the engagement and the connection of the form and the content and how they work together to give you a certain perspective on certain ideas. And I personally think this is a very compelling idea that I am also working on further within my thesis. So if you're interested in that, I would also think about making more videos on their account. But it has also been highly criticized, of course, as most scholars have been criticized by others, which is also very important for the improvement and development of thought and the whole academic field. They have been criticized for Robert Stecker out of two different reasons, or even more, but these are the ones I want to mention right now. The first reason that Robert Stecker, who is an American scholar, mentioned in his essay What is Literature was that Lamarque and Olsen were only interested in this aesthetic value, and he says that there's so much more a work can be valued for. But I think that it depends on how you read Lamarque and Olsen, and as I said, they are also talking sometimes about other kinds of values, but they are just not as interested in these. So it depends on what you're interested in, and also, as also Eagleton realized, that it's always about a certain kind of group of people deciding what is interesting and relevant and what can be called literary in a certain period of time and a certain cultural framework. And I think that is a way that you can really describe literature quite well with. But Robert Stecker still tries to take a broader approach. He also doesn't like the idea that an author has to have some certain aesthetic intentions when writing a book, so that his work is meant to be read in a certain way, so that readers can understand it in a certain way, because he says it might be that an author didn't have these intentions at all and we still value the work for being the work that it is. And I think he has a point here, but this whole debate around intentionalism is something that I do not want to cover in this video, so that would go a little bit too far, but if you're interested in that, I will also take that on in the future. But I also want to introduce you to Robert Stecker's own ideas of what a literary work is, because he says that for him, neither linguistic definitions, not this institutional account, nor the idea of literature or literary interpretation as a kind of procedure makes sense, but he has his own idea of literature basically being imaginative writing. At the end of his text he says, "I have argued that a work W is a work of literature if and only if the work is produced in a linguistic medium and, first, it is a novel, short story, tale, drama or poem, and the writer of the work is intended that it possesses aesthetic, cognitive or interpretation-centered value, and the work is written with sufficient technical skill for it to be possible to take that intention seriously, or the work possesses aesthetic, cognitive or interpretation-centered value to a significant degree, or the work falls under a predecessor concept to our concept of literature and was written while the predecessor concept held sway, or or the work belongs to the work of a great writer." Although these ideas are quite interesting, Stecker himself realizes that there's also problems with this because, for example, I could ask, what is our concept of literature these days, because he hasn't described that within his definition. Or what does aesthetic, cognitive or interpretation-centered value even mean exactly? Or why does it have to be a novel, short story, tale, drama or poem? And what is even a great writer? Or what is a significant degree of a value, and so on. And he realizes that he does not attempt to give a very distinctive definition, but rather to broaden the context and he says that his definition is thought as a kind of classification or practice which does result in borderline cases, so you will always find works that do not meet these categories that he put up in total, but that is not a problem for him. So I think all of these accounts give you a lot to think about. I did not want to go into too much detail on each of them because I wanted to keep this video as concise as possible. I hope you still got an idea of the ideas of Eagleton, Lamarque and Olsen and Stecker. If you're interested to learn more about them, let me know what you would like to know about or what kinds of videos you would like to see on this channel. I'm happy to delve deeper into each of them because I'm really interested in that, and I'm really interested in aesthetic value and literature as concept and the literary as well, and also this idea of literature as a social practice and the conventions that govern this practice. So I hope you enjoyed the video. If you stay till the end, consider subscribing to the channel and also look at my other videos I've been making in this series on literary theory and also in my series on fantasy and science fiction and Gothic and Romantic literature, as these are the videos that I've been making on the more practical side of reading myself. And I thank you for watching this video and staying until the end. See you in my next video and have a nice day. Bye bye.